Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 6th of August 2015, just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio behind the technical desk is Mike Robinson, and we're also going to be joined by live video link with Mike West from Bastion Radio. Before we bring Mike in, just a brief comment on the weather. It's wonderful here in Plymouth, so we're very happy. Largely blue sky, sunshine, and I believe that it's pretty good in Glasgow. Let me check. Yes, it says here on the sheet that it's sunny in Glasgow, so I can imagine there's a lot of happy faces north of the border. I have no idea what the weather is over the rest of the UK, so whatever you see looking out the window, that's what you've got. Okay, well, Mike, have we got you there?
And yes, good afternoon.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for joining us. Well, Mike is going to start off with some comments on positive things. And as to be expected, of course, these major and very positive events are not happening in UK, where we've got other problems. Let's see what a country like Egypt can actually do.
Well, yes, because Egypt has opened the second Suez Canal. So they raised $8 billion. Through what might be described as national credit. What they actually did was issued bonds at interest, admittedly, but they refused to allow any corporate or foreign interests to invest in those bonds. Only Egyptian citizens and only private Egyptian citizens could invest in these, and they were getting an interest rate which was significantly above what the banks were willing to pay. So what they were really attempting to do was to get Egyptian citizens to take their money out of the banks or from under their sofas or whatever it was and to invest in this project. And that's what they did. And so 1 year after the beginning of the project, they have a new canal, which of course is going to begin accepting shipping very soon. Now, as you can see here, Bloomberg very positive about that, and indeed Business Insider the same. And this seems to be the message right across the financial press, because they all seem to be pretty bitter that a so-called third world country is building productive infrastructure. And of course, in a sense, if we look at the amount of trade which is being shipped at the moment, it's at all-time low. So in a sense, they have a point, but nonetheless, the truth of the matter is that Egypt not only investing in this project, but they're also investing in greening desert valleys and so on. They are, of course, going to be relying on the BRICS infrastructure to generate the trade, which is going to be used for, that's going to make use of both Suez canals. So it really doesn't matter what the Western financial system thinks of this. They can present their bitter headlines as much as they like. The Egyptians, as and when the BRICS infrastructure, the BRICS mechanism starts getting to work, are going to do very well out of it. Thank you very much. And the rest of us continue to live in our bankrupt world.
Quite remarkable, isn't it? There we've got Egypt showing what can be done when you've got a positive government that is simply using the real wealth of the nation. They get on with doing something which is positive, which is constructive. Meanwhile, here we are in David Cameron's Conservative Party Britain 2015, riddled with fraud, corruption, lies, propaganda, and of course serious abuse of children. And Mike, I'll hand over to you on this one. We've got the BBC busy crowing that money has been withdrawn from Kids Company, and we've been very interested in this organisation for some time because whatever they have been doing, it appears that their life took a turn for the worst when they started to talk about paedophiles active around David Cameron's government. Can you tell us a bit more about what you're seeing with this one?
Well, it was interesting to see Camilla Bat. I call her Camilla Bat because simply I can't pronounce her surname. It's a bit of a mouthful. But here we see her on the Victoria Derbyshire show this morning, all of a sudden making the revelation that she's had meetings with police with regards to senior politicians being involved in child sex abuse at a very high level. These revelations, she seems to be biting out now that the funding has been withdrawn after the last £3 million batch that she's just had, and the charity's now closed down. So it seems to me, if she knew and was aware of these events, certainly why aren't these being investigated? It seems to me now that she's biting out those around her. Maybe there are some. I'm certainly not saying that there's no truth in the allegations that she's saying, but I find it rather suspicious that now's the time she's speaking out about it, and just wonder why.
Well, maybe I can just add to that. We started to get a few sniffs of this case some months ago, and I believe I'm correct in saying that some members of the Metropolitan Police were particularly interested in that. Attention was turning on this lady after she put a list forward into the government, and on that list allegedly were names of people at high level who were involved in the abuse of children. And the sources close to the Met indicate that then things started to turn nasty for this lady. Why hasn't she said anything before? Well, maybe the list was a catalyst for her. She suddenly started to realise there was more to it. But we do see a number of people that constantly say, well, I did know at the time, but there was all sorts of reasons why I couldn't speak out. So on one hand, we could condemn her for that. On the other hand, we could say we've even got police now saying that when they were young police constables, they knew stuff was happening around children's home, but they didn't do anything about it. I think on a positive note, that where people are going in the right direction, we ought to be prepared to forget some things in the past, otherwise we can never move forward. And it was Bill Maloney himself who said that there should be an amnesty for some paedophiles if they would start to blow the whistle on how these rings work. And Bill Maloney's point was that, of course, many of the people involved had been blackmailed, bullied, or were abuse victims themselves. Mike, I think... No? Okay. So I don't know how you'd feel on that. I just wonder whether she got to the point where she felt she had to speak out. But my goodness, the government's going for her.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay, that's understandable. But there's a couple of questions here, isn't there? And it's about this charitable status these charities have, while taking taxpayer funds from government at the same time. I mean, I understand they've had about £38 million donated from government over the years. So it really does make you think, really, are these just extended government departments?
Well, Mike, I'll stick with you on this topic because, okay, I have got an open mind about what's been going on at Kids Company, but isn't it interesting that we've had the mainstream press even attacking them on this aspect? The Guardian was in there in a very big way with a major article saying, oh, well, Kids Company, is it really a charity because it's been sucking off government money? And yet we've had the political charity Common Purpose not only operating fully on government money, but sharing offices of the Office of Deputy Prime Minister, as was. Mike?
Right, well, since you bring the name Common Purpose up, I've got to just mention the fact that, of course, Camilla Batt, as Mike wants to call her, did take part in the original Ridley Scott produced Common Purpose promotional video. So she is Common Purpose herself. And perhaps that gives a clue as to why she has said nothing for all these years. And maybe it's only the fact that she seems to have been cut adrift at this point, which is causing her to open up a little bit.
Well, that could well be true, Mike. The other thing is that I think what we're starting to see now is that as pressure's coming on the establishment, there's fractions and infighting. So maybe we've got a bit of the machinery turning in on itself. But an interesting one there. Well, let's move on because whilst Britain is not building canals or dealing with hospitals or really looking after the health and wealth of the nation, what we're into is a government that's very keen to protect anybody against allegations of paedophilia. Now, this is an article a little while ago where the Guardian was commenting on the Lord Janner case. But of course, what they were doing was talking about the fact that, oh dear, this man's too ill to go to proper trial. It's going to be a trial of facts. So there can be no verdict of guilty and the court cannot pass sentence. Now, I've put a subheader in there, mainstream press gears up to protect Janner. Because have a look at this. This is ITV going very big on a man who was clearly a paedophile, but oh dear, no, we can't put him through a trial, so he's going to have to go through a trial of facts. Well, the charges were proven, but he won't face a jail term because this was actually done as a trial of facts, and prison's not an option. He's got dementia, so 21 charges against him, and the victim absolutely wrecked, but he's put through a trial of facts, and now we've got, in my view, ITV nudging the public to accept that we're going to see a number of trials of facts for paedophiles, and of course they're going to go off scot-free. Mike, I might be being a bit cynical here.
Not at all. I don't think so. It was exposed a couple of months ago, wasn't it, that if you're a pleb suffering from dementia and accused of historical sex abuse, that you can still be tried in your absence. And there is a case, and the name doesn't come to me right now, but this was exposed a couple of months ago, just as this was all kicking off with Janner, about he's still attending House of Lords, but not being fit for purpose when it comes to facing a trial. So there is a two-tier level system here. I think this is all part of normalising the paedophilia label and trying to make it sound like it's an illness at best, and it can be treated by these people. And I just think this is all part of that narrative, as it were, because let's face it, I think there's a lot more to come out yet, and we can see the establishment just closing in and protecting themselves at this very moment, and it does question whether there is any justice in this country at all.
Yeah. Well, on the subject of the information coming out, it's been very apparent to us, of course, that we're already seeing this spin being put out by the mainstream media. The BBC, of course, top of the list. Their reports on Ted Heath ending, well, of course, all of his trusts say this man is totally innocent and it's outrageous that anybody should suspect him. So we clearly need to go elsewhere for our information, and I just thought today we'd take a selection of information off good sources from the internet. Now, apologies to the owner of this site if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I've always called it Angifan, and I'll stick with that. But I'd encourage people to go to this blog spot because they have a really excellent article talking about Heath and the cover-up of paedophile rings within the British government. And clearly this is the state of play. We have a criminal parliament. It's criminal in a banking and monetary sense. It's criminal in ideology. And these people are involved in child abuse and they're protecting child abusers. Have a look at this article. A lot of detail in it. I've just taken a taster, but do go to the actual website. This is talking about a gentleman called Keith O'Dowd. Back in 1976, he said he discovered 5 colour photographs in the jewel box of a lady called Rita Lambert. He was sharing a flat with her in Woolwich, London, and Heath was said to have been in 2 of the photographs, and the detective sergeant in 3 of them. Children were involved in this. So this is some of the material that was reported in the national press at the time, and then it's all gently drifted to one side and it disappears. So Angifan recommended particularly this article. This one, unusual, has got some unusual information on the overall site, but a particularly good coverage again on Heath. And this time it's linking it into wider issues around Jimmy Savile, etc., and Margaret Thatcher we can see here. But the headline there says it all. There's no doubt whatsoever that British intelligence services particularly MI5 and MI6, would have known about all of this. I fully support that statement. There is no question that with a massive spying apparatus that the British state has amassed since the early 50s, there can be no doubt the state was well aware of what was going on, and therefore we have the very services we, the public, pay to protect us involved in the cover-up of paedophiles operating at the heart of British government. Mike, if you just pop that one back, if you can, thank you very much. We've just got this little excerpt here. It says the cover-up virtually knows no limits. When known paedophile Thomas Hambleton went into Dunblane Primary School in Scotland and shot dead 16 children, the Scottish judge Lord Cullen declared that a number of vital documents relating to the case should be locked away for 100 years. This being apparently to protect the victims and their family, but what the article is saying, no, this is to protect what was going on around the procuring and abuse of children. And also give you this one, and then we'll bring Mike in. We've got Kathy Fox blog, another excellent analysis of Heath's activities. This time she brings in the work from Michael Shrimpton. Now, there are some questions over Michael Shrimpton and what he's been talking about, but this barrister, has consistently been saying that there have been high-level paedophile rings not only operating through the European Union, but pan-Europe as well. And in his book Spy Hunter, I think this is something like page 686 or 680, you can read details of this, and significantly he's drawing in the fact that German intelligence was involved in this circle in order to blackmail people such as Ted Heath. Now, Shrimpton's come under a lot of flack in the mainstream press, sent to prison for making a claim that there was going to be a nuclear bomb attack at the London Olympics. But of course, he was basing his accusations on much of his own research to do with missing nuclear weapons in the world. And this was a subject that Britain's mainstream press simply did not want to go near. So there we have it. You can't get this material from any of the mainstream press. They're really skimming over the top. Get online, do your own research, and I've given you a good start there with some of those articles. But Mike, unfortunately, weren't able to get these across to you before the programme. But what's your feeling about Ted Heath and the accusations?
If we can go back to Michael Shrimpton, if I understand rightly, wasn't he also arrested on sort of gay child porn images found on a USB stick that had been swapped whilst he was in transit from somewhere? I think they tried to stitch him up with that because he was at the point of disclosing certainly what was going on at Hope Le Gueren in Jersey with the children's home there. So it's the same old pattern, isn't it? Anyone that feels like they're going to, they're going to expose or whistleblow on the senior politicians, they find, or they go out their way to stitch them up. So I think there's a massive stitch up here with Michael Shrimpton, and any means to get him into prison seems to be the flavour of the day, to try and stop him from talking out about these, because he has expressively spoke about Ted Heath and his trips on the Morning Cloud to Jersey, taking kids on trips there. And if I understand rightly, one kid was thrown overboard or died.
Well, that's the inference, that children were taken over to Jersey. They were taken out to be abused on board Morning Cloud and I believe other vessels, and it's reported that some of those children never returned. So the inference is that they were thrown overboard. This is very, very dark, heavy stuff, and we know, of course, many people just find this impossible to believe, that people would be involved in the murder of children.
You mentioned Dunblane as well, Brian. I think that goes back to 95, 96. I think with the position that we're in at this very moment, with CSA being exposed, the dam's cracked quite clearly I think whatever notice was put on that, so that we can't hear that story for 75 or 100 years, whatever it is left on it, that needs to be re-looked at, because there's quite clearly higher level paedophile ring involved in that case as well in Dunblane. This wasn't just about disarming the UK. There's a lot behind that story that should come out now, and I think that should be revisited and part of this CSA inquiry as well, because that will expose a lot of high-level people that were involved in that Dunblane.
Yes. Well, totally agree. Perhaps we can do a bit of work on Dunblane. A lot of good material out there. Perhaps we can help bring that forward. Well, let's continue the theme, but just remind the public, of course, that recently we had the trial of Ben Fellows. Ben Fellows had made accusations against Tory grandee Ken Clarke. Ben found not guilty of perverting the course of justice. But of course, the establishment has been very keen to suppress information about that trial. As we pointed out, very little reporting as the trial proceeded. The press had labelled Ben a fantasist on day one. They didn't then report, and it was almost that they were shocked when he was found not guilty. But if you want to get back to the start of some of Ben Fellows' exposure of what was happening around him, then have a look at 21st Century Wire. This was part of Patrick Henningson's original report back in October 2012. And of course, some parts of this story Patrick was ordered to take down by Ken Clarke himself. So a very interesting situation now that Ben was found not guilty of perverting the course of justice. A number of questions to ask. And there will be later today, I hope, a new article up on the UK Column website talking about the Ben Fellows case and details of the trial, kindly provided by Mr. Roper. So if you're watching, Mr. Roper, thank you very much for all the work you did. That will be up and available shortly. Well, where does that take us? I think we better head to another trouble spot in the world, which is MH370.
Yes, all the mainstream media, all of them, talking about the Malaysian Prime Minister's comments, speech yesterday regarding this part of this aircraft which was sent to France. And this is an example from The Independent. If we just look at the next one, Brian, this is another example from Reuters. Malaysia says matches prove wing part is from missing flight MH370. And in fact, and another example of it, here's the full statement from the Malaysian Prime Minister. So they're all publishing the full statement, all really reinforcing in everybody's mind that these parts are from that aircraft. But if we actually look at the live feed that was on The Guardian yesterday, and just highlight a part of it, in fact, the French authorities who have been looking at this flaperon cannot say that this belonged to MH370. So the media absolutely reinforcing to everybody that this was a part of MH370. The French authorities have not been able to say that, and all they have said is that they suppose or they presume, depending on the translation, that was the case. That is not being reported widely at all. The live stream from The Guardian here did report it because it's unedited, as it were, or uncensored, perhaps might be a better word, but the other mainstream articles not commenting on this at all. So on the other hand, they are now magically starting to find more pieces. Apparently a window has now been discovered, but again, we don't know what aircraft that's from, and I suppose if you lose one, you can lose two. But at the moment, no evidence as yet as to which aircraft this has come from.
Yeah, Mike, I don't know how well up on MH370 you are, but if we just look at these reports, there seems to be conflict in the story, so something's wrong.
Well, but the first question I asked for, how long ago did MH370 crash? It's over a year ago, as far as I'm concerned. And the flaperon that they've allegedly found is a hollow unit with some mechanical parts in it. Now, that would have sunk to the seabed. How that's emerged, I do not know, even if you look at the tidal flows around that area. One thing's for sure, Diego Garcia is within that vicinity. And I've always been a strong believer when that aircraft first went missing, that ended up in Diego Garcia. You just had to look at the aircraft itinerary and the reason for that.
Well, Mike, just before you say any more, I mean, part of the coverage today is the fact that the families are absolutely up in arms about this. Mixed messages are complaining about, because the Malaysians saying one thing, the French saying another, and really the people that are suffering the most on this are the families, and they're not getting any answers. And they need to stop messing about and get to the point, really.
Yeah,
don't they?
I think the Indians last year, a couple of months after it, they actually said that it looked like it came down in the region of Diego Garcia. That story was quickly hushed up. I think on Wayback Machine you can still pull that story up. I've certainly got it screen captured. I think Malaysia actually agreed with the Indians. They're playing it very coy at the moment, but I do believe they know what happened to that aircraft.
Yeah. Okay, well, if we're to get the truth out there, clearly we need more than mainstream press and media. And the UK column has been warning that there's a significant event happening in Plymouth at the moment. That's due to take place tomorrow. Plymouth City Council is desperate to close down an alternative news site called Our Place, Our Base. And the reason for this is that some good investigative journalism is starting to unravel some rather dubious behaviour within Plymouth City Council. So what is the council's reaction to this? Well, it's to close down the website, and the owners of that website are due in Plymouth Magistrates Court at 2:00 tomorrow. If there's anybody down in the southwest or who can travel from further afield, this is a very, very significant case, because if Plymouth City Council is able to hide misdeeds within the council by simply shutting down free speech, Plymouth City Council will be leading the charge for state control of free speech, whether it's press, video or on the internet. So Plymouth Magistrates Court there at 2:00 tomorrow to give your support and indeed to hear what takes place in the case itself. Mike, this is there's a little bit of chat in our chat box at the moment, and a couple of individuals have said, well, we're covering stuff that's well known. I am going to mention what they would like me to mention in a minute, but actually this local case with OPOB, in my book, is one of the most important things going on at the moment, because the precedent, if Plymouth City Council pushes through this precedence, which is essentially to cover up wrongdoing within the council, then any other local authority, council, whatever it is, has the possibility to shut down free speech on the internet if people get too close to the truth. This is unbelievably dangerous. And of course, they can only do this with new powers, which David Cameron's fascist Tory party has brought in the first place.
Well, we experienced a very similar situation not so long ago, about 6-7 weeks ago, where our web host was informed by, they couldn't disclose who it was, but they did say it was at a authoritative level. Just on the basis of a word and an email, they got our site closed down. And it wasn't until I raised it with the hosting company in Texas in America and said, well, can you show us the court order that got us closed down? And they said, there isn't one. So I escalated it. And luckily, there was a manager with good sense in there that said, well, as far as I'm concerned, if there's no legal authority to this, then as far as I'm concerned, your website goes back up. And luckily, they put it back up within 24 hours. So we do have I'm not sure whether it's a local authority in our case, but they do seem to be acting just as the police. And I'm a firm believer that this is all the beyond authority rhetoric and common purpose instilled in these departments, that they do actually think, well, they're our rulers now. Your local authority, they don't serve you, you serve them. And if they're not happy with what you're serving up, they'll get you shut down. I think it's as simple as that now, Brian. And I think this trend has allowed to be happened. We've allowed it to happen because we've remained mute on how we're treated by our local authorities. And I'm certainly interested in that case. And luckily tomorrow I've got a cancellation on the job I was meant to do, so I might just turn up to that.
Okay, well, that would be excellent. And the other thing I will add, of course, is hand in glove with the action by the council. We now have the situation that police are embedded within the council itself. So we're seeing documents not just on Plymouth City Council headed note paper, but they have the logo of Plymouth City Council. Then they've got police logo, and the two are sharing offices. This is also taking place in Nottingham and other areas across the country. So what we've done, what David Cameron's Tory party has done, is remove the separation of powers, police and local authorities, hand in glove. And of course, if something is going on like the abuse of children and you need to cover it up, no problem, because the police don't act for truth and justice. They act on the instructions of the local council. I think we probably need to do a special on that one subject, but we'll move on at the moment. And Mike, you've got some information here about Tunisia.
Yes, so interesting development yesterday, because the British and the French, but particularly the British, absolutely being accused by the Tunisian Prime Minister of being the cause of the recent Tunisian attacks. He said, we're against all military intervention in Libya. We consider that the current situation is the result of the 2011 intervention, which created chaos. And he's absolutely making the point that we have made on many occasions, that Libya, while you might not have liked Gaddafi terribly much, Libya was a functioning nation state. It's no longer a functioning nation state, and we're seeing the results of it. So interesting comments from the Prime Minister of Tunisia.
Well, as always, it was a coincidence that you had come across this one this morning. I'm preparing parts of the news, and somebody had sent in an email saying, Brian, have you seen this particular report on Activist Post, which I hadn't. The headline was British SAS Special Forces dressed up as ISIS rebels fighting Assad in Syria. And it said in the text there, more than 120 members belonging to the elite regiment are currently in the war-torn country, covertly dressed in black and flying ISIS flags. To which I want to ask a question. Did Parliament vote to put troops into Syria? Did any of the British public vote for this operation, apparently called Shader? Well, I went to the source, which is the Express. It's mentioned in the Activist Post. This was the article, SAS dress as ISIS fighters in undercover war on jihadis. And if you think this through, we are seeing David Cameron's Conservative government now simply acting out of control. Mike, I'll pick up on your term. I'll say acting beyond authority, because David Cameron lost the parliamentary vote to bomb Syria, to attack Syria. What he's now doing is using special forces as his private army to attack Assad. And this is all pre-planned. This is part of the article. British special forces are mounting hit-and-run raids against Islamic State deep inside eastern Syria, dressed as insurgent fighters. It then goes on to say it comes just days after David Cameron gave carte blanche for the SAS and SBS to target ISIS leaders as part of the government's broad spectrum response to the murder of 30 British tourists by ISIS gunmen in the Tunisian beach resort of, is that Sousse? Is that the correct pronunciation? I'm going to just highlight here our comment, but wait a minute, the Tunisian killings were back in June, and what this newspaper reports is that in March 2015, Defence Secretary Michael Fallon was meeting with US military commanders in Kuwait. UK Deputy Commander Major General Bob Bruce was also there, but this is in Kuwait, and in these talks the UK says it's going to contribute to a US-led programme to train the Syrian moderate opposition. Well, clearly putting troops into Syria is nothing to do with training. It's actually putting troops in. So if we remind ourselves, we have a vote in Parliament about military action in Syria. Cameron loses it. What does he do? Well, he's apparently used Tunisia to say, well, we've had a Cobra meeting. We've got to counter terrorism wherever it is, whether it's in Syria or Iraq or anywhere else in the world, and we are going to do it. So he's not interested what the vote is in Parliament. He's prepared to put the troops straight in on the ground, boots on the ground, and then what have we effectively got? Parliament says no to war. David Cameron simply says yes, he's going to do it. And I'll reinforce the point with this wonderful photograph, because essentially David Cameron is giving the British public the finger and saying, well, I'm going to attack Assad and Syria anyway. This man is out of control, Mike.
I think if you look at the Conservative Party as a human entity, it would be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. I think they're totally out of control. The only person that's making any sort of form of sense at the moment and is gradually getting a grip on this and exposing what's going on is Putin. We had Putin yesterday have a meeting with the Turkish ambassador, lambasting him, telling him about President Erdogan, calling him he's ISIS troops. They're saying that he's ISIS troops. So, the Russians certainly know what's going on. Cameron, he's a loose cannon. The problems in Tunisia directly created by the problems in Libya, as we know. Libya is an absolute mess. As usual, whatever we touch and the US touch, we destroy the regime. And it seems to me now the last person that may be able to expose this has just now suffered a death sentence, and that's Saeed Gaddafi. I think he'd certainly have a lot of information about the Blair regime and the goings on between Blair and Gaddafi. The whole thing's a mess. It really is a mess, and I can't describe it, Brian. It's just they're striking out. Like I say, an injured dog, and they're biting out in all directions, and it's just so much mayhem. The mayhem's by design, just to keep us totally confused as to what's going on.
Well, Mike, I know when you get to the point you almost don't know what to say, because once you see this stuff going on, it is so obvious. Are these people mentally ill? Is the British government mentally ill? Well, there were rumours, of course, that Putin considered the British government as a body to be mentally ill. And he was saying to his own ministers, how can we form foreign policy with against or in connection with a nation who's being led by a government which is mentally ill? Certainly they're low empathy people. If we haven't got the professional ability to classify them as psychopaths, we can say these people are clearly severe low empathy people. And where are they going to take us if we're not careful? Well, it's probably this, Mike.
Yes, it is the 70th anniversary of the bombing of Japan with atomic weapons. And people may find this caption a little distasteful, but frankly, I find the whole bombing of Japan at the end of the Second World War distasteful, because it was unnecessary. It was only done in order to give a live demonstration of the capability to Russia, and Japan was already defeated effectively at the time, so there's no need for it at all. 70,000 people killed in Hiroshima, 80,000 people in Nagasaki, and completely unnecessary. Well, today on the BBC Radio 4 programme, they were celebrating the 70th birthday of the first live nuclear attack by discussing which parts of the world were most likely to end up in nuclear conflict themselves. And the conclusion that they came to was that it would be India and Pakistan. Now, of course, again, here's another example of nations split up by the actions of Britain, because, of course, we caused the conflict in the first place, which caused India and Pakistan to split into two separate nations. And again, what is going on behind the scenes in order to continue to stir up these border conflicts? I would suggest that the type of activity we're seeing in Syria is an example of what might be going on in India and Pakistan as well. So certainly the Council for Foreign Relations and the BBC today highlighting that there's a threat of serious military confrontation between India and Pakistan as a result of growing violence in Kashmir, and certainly the so-called experts that the BBC had on this morning believe that could very well turn nuclear at some point. So they were at least pleased to consider those options.
Yeah, it's serious stuff. And what have we got here to do with Monsieur Hollande and France?
Right. So this is a telephone call that Putin had with Hollande yesterday, and they have now put to bed this whole issue of the ships that France was supposed to be building for the Russians. But of course, under the embargo rules, they are not allowed to supply anymore. France was originally saying that they were going to only give back part of the money to Russia, despite the fact that Russia hadn't defaulted on any contracts at all. But apparently this issue has now been resolved, and as far as Russia is concerned, the issue is closed. But it's all quite ironic, because if we move on to the next one, Patrick Henningson's 21st Century Wire here, pointing out that, of course, these sanctions only seem to apply to certain nations, and the United States doesn't seem to be one of those, because they continue to receive goods from Russia, a $1 billion contract here to supply rocket motors. And of course, NASA effectively out of business, their budget's cut to the bone. They're relying on receiving this type of material from Russia. But there are no sanctions applied when the United States is in the frame. It's only, other types of countries, other smaller nations that have to actually impose these sanctions and suffer as a result.
Yeah, it's just astounding, isn't it? What's going on across the board at the moment? There's what we are all told is happening politically, and then we see other things. I think you've still got another slide here to do.
I do, yes.
It's a little bit frightening.
Well, actually, it's pretty positive. Another piece of positive news. That's 2-in-1 news show, Brian. I don't know what we're going to do about it, but Jeremy Corbyn suggesting that Tony Blair should stand trial for the Iraq War, which I think is a pretty brave thing to say, bearing in mind a fair proportion of the Labour Party supporters of Tony Blair. Nonetheless, that's what he's calling for. He was speaking on Newsnight, and he said that Blair should confess for any plans that he made with George W. Bush to invade Iraq in 2003. And he said that if Blair remains silent, the publication of the Chilcot report. Of course, this all is dependent on the publication of the Chilcot report. He said the publication of the Chilcot report would force Blair's hand. He called the Iraq War an illegal war, and he said that he was confident about that. And he said, indeed, Kofi Annan, who's the former UN Secretary General, has confirmed that it was an illegal war. And he said the Chilcot report is going to come out sometime. What happened in Crawford, Texas in 2002 in private meetings with Bush that Blair had. Why has the Chilcot report still not come out? Because apparently there is still debate about the release of information on one side or the other of the Atlantic. And so this is quite positive comments from Corbyn.
Yeah, amazing. Mike, we're just watching time. We're coming down to 2 minutes. If you've got any quick comments you want to make on that, on those items from Mike.
Yeah, not being left wing or right wing myself. I mean, just that point is enough to make you want to get back on the voting register and vote just on that single issue to get Blair in the International Criminal Courts on that matter, because. If we look at the aftermath of the Iraq War and where that took us, it's took us somewhere very dark. And that dark guy, Tony Blair, is responsible for taking us there. Yeah. Just on your story about the Russian 2 ships with France, it's we can see, the likes of Russia spending and adding to their defence, whilst Britain here, we're tearing apart our defences. Might be a little bit comforting to know that not so far from you, Brian, in Devonport, they've just refurbished a World War I ship. So I'm just wondering if that's going to be called back into service anytime soon.
Yeah, probably. I think we'll need it. That is probably the fleet at the moment. And it's no disrespect to the men and women out there serving their country at the moment. But of course, Britain's defence is being stripped to the bone. And we were informed a few days ago that the government's pushing very, very heavily now for uniform force levels to be agreed with the Germans. This is the lead into the European army. and Britain's RAF to be subsumed into the army. If you want to know where all the trouble comes from, have a look at this article on the Daily Mail. Thank you to the gentleman who highlighted this to us. Robert Conquest has died, but have a look at his writings on the history of the Soviet regime. And of course, one of the key matters is who was funding it and its origins, because those origins and those funders very important in what's going on today. And maybe a bit of the truth is also popping to the surface here. This was a Telegraph article. Never mind the Czech gold the Nazis stole. This is highlighting the fact that the Bank for International Settlements was releasing money to the Nazi regime, giving them a good leg up the ladder to start war in Europe. But of course, in the history of this bank, we're starting to look at the corrupt history of the international banking system itself. Well, we will end there. Mike, thank you very much for joining us. Delighted to have you back on in the future.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. And I'll just say to those people who are interested in the Hampstead case in London, I'd just like to state on camera that I have full confidence in the information that's been put forward by the Hampstead mother, Ella, and her partner, Abraham. The story is correct. And of course, what we've seen going on through the family courts is another government orchestrated cover-up. The testimony of those two children, who can challenge that? Coached? Of course not. Withdrawn their statements? Of course not. However, if I am to comment on the latest video that's been posted, first of all, I would like to know who posted the video, because of course it's been posted anonymously. So I don't answer to anonymous people. Once it's established who the video was posted by, I will be delighted to comment more fully, but be under no illusions, despite any statements by the parents in the Hampstead case. I fully support them, their testimony, the testimony of the children, and the validity of that case. That's my answer for today. We'll see whether the anonymous person has the courage to stand forward and be identified. Thanks very much for joining us, and remember, if you can get to the Magistrates Court in Plymouth tomorrow at 2 p.m, a very, very important case. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.